Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri Appellate Attorney, and I sometimes answer questions on YouTube. Today I'm going to be talking about the way that you can beat a DWI or DUI ticket. It's pretty simple when you get right down to it. There won't be a police officer one who can get you who can get their test results in using this technique. So in just a moment we'll get to that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about DUI and DWI arrests. And to begin with, I want to note the fact that I am not your typical attorney, right? I did not go to law school right out of college. Mommy and daddy didn't pay for college, and mommy and daddy didn't pay for law school. I paid for law school, and I paid for college. As a result, I have a different view on many things. So, how did I get to this point? How did I become an attorney? Simple. I first went into the military. I spent 6 years in the military. I got out as a combat medic, and I decided I'd become a respiratory therapist because it sounded like a really great profession. And I did that for 13 years before I left the profession of respiratory care and went to law school. So that's how I got to law school. But one of the things that's been most fundamental for me in the practice of law, I think, is the fact that I have a healthcare background. For 13 years, I took care of patients in hospitals. And many times when I was taking care of those patients in hospitals, they were in the emergency room. And sometimes they had wound up in the emergency room because of either their drinking or someone else's drinking. Hey guys, if you like this so far, I would appreciate it if you would smash the like button there on the YouTube console. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. Thanks. I remember distinctly around the 4th of July one year in the small town of Quincy, Illinois. I was the department director and I was on call in case there was an emergency at the hospital. I wasn't always on call, but I was this night. It was the July 4th weekend and I'd given the supervisors that weekend off. I always tried to work the holidays for the supervisors because I had every other weekend off. So, sure enough, about 12:30, my beeper went off and I was asked to come back to the hospital for a trauma code. Now, you may not be familiar with what trauma codes are, but basically it means that somebody's been in an accident or there's been a shooting. Anyway, the person is coming into the emergency room and they are not in good condition. So here's what happened. There was a gentleman who was pretty much a genius who was working as a summer intern out on the river at the lock and dam. He was working for, I believe it was whatever agency controls the river and controls the dams on the river, I think the Corps of Engineers. He was working out there as an intern. And as the day wound down, and got a little closer to the evening hours, he stayed on and talked with people and left there at about 9 o'clock, 9:15 at night in order to drive home to Quincy. Now this is about maybe 15, 20 miles south of the city, and he had to drive backcountry roads to get back to the city. Well, if you've been in Illinois, or even if you haven't, you probably know that corn grows pretty tall. They used to say that corn was knee-high by the 4th of July, and if it was higher than that by the 4th of July, you had a really good crop. Well, this year they had a really good crop, and it was probably about 4 feet in terms of what it had grown. The other thing about corn is that they oftentimes plant it fairly close to the road, and if you have cornfields on this side and cornfields on that side, it's almost like driving down a tunnel. At least as far as being able to see what's around a curve. Because as you go around that curve, the light from the headlights is stopped by all of that corn. So this young gentleman was driving home and going around a curve. On the other end of the trip was a boy and a girl about the same age as this kid, and they were driving at about 80 miles an hour. And they were driving at 80 miles an hour because they were both drunk. Only one of them was drunk driving, the other was a drunk passenger, but as drunk passengers are apt to do, she did not wear her seatbelt. As you might have guessed, these two met in the middle of that turn, and they met head on. There was a horrific crash. Someone came by, saw the wreck, called for the ambulance, and the ambulance went out there along with the fire trucks. It took them about 25 minutes to extricate everyone. The only hospital close by that could handle that kind of trauma was Blessing Hospital, where I worked. And I went into the hospital, and the first person who got in was the driver who was driving with the young lady. And his pupils were fixed and dilated. You could tell that he had a very bad head injury. He was having difficulty breathing. We intubated him and sent him up to surgery. They'd called in the neurosurgeon for him. The next person that came in was the young lady who'd been in the car, and she'd been thrown through the windshield. And when she went through the windshield, she had lacerated the top of her head very, very badly. And every time I squeezed the ambu bag, which is the little device that we use to breathe for people, it squeezes air into their lungs through an endotracheal tube, blood would shoot out the top of her head. That lady went to the surgery suite next, and the third person who came in, the last one to be extricated, was a young man who had better vital signs, frankly, than the other two did, but he still had a head injury. And we worked on him in the emergency room, and we took him up to surgery and got him prepped and ready to go. Over the next 4 hours, the first two people sadly passed away. And they passed away because they had been driving drunk, and they had been killed while driving drunk. The third gentleman survived. But whereas he had been a National Merit Scholarship winner and was prepared to go to Princeton, I believe it was at Princeton or Stanford in the fall of that year, he was no longer able to do that because the brain injury was so severe that he was really very limited even in just the physical tasks that he could perform. So there were 3 lives absolutely wrecked because someone who should have known better got into a car when they were impaired and drove fast and hit someone else. So I have what you might call a bit of a negative view of drunk driving. And as a result of that, I've never actually had the opportunity to litigate a drunk driving case in court because that's not the kind of case that I would take. Here is my one quick tip for avoiding a DUI conviction. Don't drink and drive. If you don't drink and drive, you'll pass every breathalyzer test they give you. They won't be able to arrest you in the first place. Don't drink and drive. When you drink, you're going to feel like you're fine. That's because alcohol depresses your inhibitions, and it makes it easier for you to believe, hey, I'm completely in charge. But you're not. You're not completely in charge, and as a result of that, you make stupid decisions. And the stupidest decision you can make is to get into a car as a driver after you've had something to drink. And the second stupidest decision you can make is to get into a car with someone who has been drinking and they are at the wheel, because you are taking your life and you are putting it in the hands of someone who is intoxicated. If you drink, don't drive. If you drink and you need to get home, call a taxi or get an Uber. Do something besides drive home, because if you do and the police arrest you, you're not going to get any sympathy from me. And more likely than not, you are probably going to get the penalty that comes with drunk driving. Police have develop their techniques for identifying drunk drivers, testing drunk drivers, and proving on body camera footage, if nothing else, how completely impaired people are. As a result of that, if you want to avoid it, just don't do it. Now, there are a lot of people out there who are thinking, boy, this was cheap. The guy told us he could get us out of a DWI ticket, and basically what he tells us is not to go get the DWI ticket in the first place. Well, that's exactly right. It is cheap, but it makes a point. The point is, if you do the crime, you can wind up doing the time, and nobody is going to feel sorry for you. And at least if the cops pick you up and take you off the road, you won't have to live with the knowledge that you wrecked someone else's life. So there is that. Again, thank you for watching, and have a terrific day. And don't drink and drive.